Hi, I'm Sara Schatz, and you're listening to Kindle Curiosity, a podcast for curious souls where we explore the creative process. Hi guys, so the guest for today's episode is Sara Moss, all the way from Australia. But before we get to her, I thought I would just have a little bit of an update for you guys. So if you've been listening, you know that Nathan and I are expecting our first baby in May, which is rapidly approaching. I am 34 weeks along and kind of trying to shift gear into maternity leave. I've definitely am learning a lot already from this baby about slowing down, taking care of myself, to take care of him. And I've been dealing with a lot of prenatal anxiety and kind of had to put the podcast on the back burner. So I haven't achieved my vision of a full season 2 before maternity leave, but I've been working through that. And actually in therapy, I've been working through that with some other things that have been causing me anxiety. And it just reached a point right after I recorded the last episode where it was so critical that I had to find a therapist and I had to get some help. And that's when I kind of just let the podcast sit. I still have a heart for it. I want to come back to it. I feel a little bit guilty that I haven't edited the episodes I've already recorded, and I have guests that I still want to talk to. I'm very excited about it, but I have limited energy and limited resources and time right now. So what I have decided to do is go ahead and shift into maternity leave. So I have one more episode for you now. And then when I come back, I'm going to be very gentle and find my new rhythm rather than trying to come back and go immediately into the weekly or bi-weekly podcast release. I will take my time, edit an episode, maybe even find a little bit of a new structure, because the way that I had to sit at the computer for a long time to get it edited, and I'm going to have a brand new little baby. So they may be becoming a little bit more casual from here on out. We'll see. So I've had to get a little creative with what to do for this episode because I've had limited time and bandwidth, but I really wanted to get something up. So this will be kind of like a teaser taste test for what we do every month over on Patreon. So starting in January, I've been inviting monthly guests for a tea time podcast. So they brew a cup of tea or pour a cup of coffee and sit down in front of the microphone and just chat really casual, kind of like I'm doing right now, about creativity. Maybe it's their creative process, a challenge that they're having, some discovery that they've made, and I'm sharing that over on Patreon. We have had new guests every month. January was Ray Amiette, February was Gracie Clump, March was Ruth Poundwhite, and April is Jackie Sun. So this isn't an episode that has been posted to Patreon. It's a bonus that I'm putting up publicly, but it's like a teaser taste test of what you would get if you sign up. So without any further ado, meet Sara Moss.
Hi there. My name is Sara Moss. I'm a writer, author and book coach in Sydney, Australia, and it is so lovely to have a cup of tea with you. Big thanks to Sara for asking me on as well. So, today, creativity. Have you got a cup of tea? Cup of coffee perhaps? I'm drinking green tea at the moment, and I'm sitting looking out at the blue skies above the northern beaches of Sydney, and I'm sitting in my studio. I've only had a studio for the past year, a dedicated space just to work in, to write, to create in, and I'm not saying any of these things to make you envious. Perhaps it's cold and wintry where you are and the skies are grey and miserable, and you're making your art in the corner of your bedroom in a few stolen minutes that you have in your day. And I've done that as well. And the thing I wanted to talk about today was actually allowing ourselves to be where we are with our creativity, whatever form that takes. Whether we write or paint or perform or knit or craft, whatever that is, I think sometimes it's so easy and seductive to get caught in the idea of where we're going, where we want to go. We admire the people in our fields, and we have those deep aspirations, possibly, or maybe a niggling fear that we admire these people, but somehow we think that we couldn't do that. And it's really, I think, a case of being okay with where we are in each and every part of the process. I've also created a desk in the corner of a small bedroom when I lived in Brisbane, and had other people around me, and was working full time. And I remember having a sense of never actually having enough time, which of course is just an extension of our modern malaise, I think. But then realizing one day that I had all the time that I needed, as long as I took the opportunity to use it when I could. So when I stopped distracting myself, I just allowed myself to do things like on a Saturday morning, instead of racing out and doing a bunch of grocery shopping or house chores or what have you, I would actually allow myself to sit and read a book by Jack Kerouac under this scrappy little lemon tree that we had in the side, a sort of a strip lawn down the side of a block of apartments. It wasn't appealing, it wasn't particularly aesthetically appealing, but it was outside, and I'd cart this little camp chair down and sit near this lemon tree until I realised there were bugs in it, and they kept biting me, and I had some sort of weird allergic reaction. But that was also a big thing. We get so caught up, I think, in all the sense of what we need to be achieving and doing for everyone else. We're trying to be good partners and parents and daughters and sisters and sons and husbands and wives. And if we have that creative drive, it can be the thing that we quash for a long time, until there's a point where it makes us really miserable and unhappy to keep doing that. And, well, from my experience, I thought, hang on, this isn't sustainable. I'm miserable when I don't allow myself to do these things that bring me joy. And I don't know if you've done this, but sometimes I'd think, oh, well, it's just reading Jack Kerouac under the lemon tree. It's hardly earth-shattering, is it? I'm not feeling like I'm making some grand contribution to the world. But what that was the beginning of me allowing myself to do was to just be okay with being led to wherever my creative desire, my intuition, some sort of deep need to be quiet and calm and just slow down and have that permission to enjoy whatever it was that I was drawn to at the time. Dabbling, that sort of Renaissance soul, a generalist, dabbler, flaneur mentality that a lot of people frown upon somehow, as if doing all sorts of different things is somehow less than devoting yourself to one particular skill or craft or profession. And I always had a really deep sense that that was wrong, that it couldn't possibly be a bad thing to actually explore what you might be good at. I always thought if you didn't try a whole lot of different things. How on earth could you possibly pull out a sense of something that could maybe give you joy on a longer term basis? And so I never had language for this until I came across Barbara Sher's book, I Could Do Anything If Only I Knew What It Was. And this was a revelation to me, because in one of the chapters there, it mentions scanners, multi-passionate people who loved dipping in and out of all sorts of things. And Barbara Sher she's written a lot of books. She's been a coach for many years now. I think she's now in her mid to late 80s. And she was is a champion of the multi-passionate person. She in no way decries this essence of trying and exploring within creative realms or otherwise. And I tell you, when I read that book, I cried, because it was the first time I felt someone had seen who I was, and they understood this restlessness, this dissatisfaction with each thing that I'd find, because I'd been labouring under the misconception that I had to just find one thing that I was good at, because of course that's the way most of the world is structured, right? And it's been really lovely to see over the past 5 years or so, having spent a lot of time in the online world as well, that there's now a far deeper appreciation of being drawn to all sorts of different things creatively. And I think the next step, certainly for me, as we're having this cup of tea, I certainly don't want to be putting words in your mouth or speaking for your experience, but for my own experience, allowing that to be okay was the first step. And then when I thought potentially maybe writing for me really is something that I'd like to put more time into. And when I'd said this to friends several years ago, everyone thought it was really funny, because they would just say, Sarah, but you're already a writer. What do you mean you think you might be a writer? Because at this point I've been my whole professional life in one degree or another has involved being paid to write, except for my very early days. My first job was as a photographer. But I've always had a creative vein running through all the work that I have been doing, and most of that came from writing. But this was the funny thing, I never really saw it as, inverted commas, air quotes, real writing, because I would be writing freelance articles for magazines. I would write about travel. I worked in corporate communications. I would write media releases. When I was in government, I would write sometimes speeches for ministers and speeches for dignitaries. It was very much what I thought of at the time as workmanlike writing, because I had in my head that this quote-unquote real writing happened if you were a novelist or a poet or a playwright. And the people that managed to sustain a career from producing those sorts of things, that was real writing. And of course, that's a little bit crazy. We know that. Anyone from the outside looking in just saw that I was paid to write. So in many ways, I was already living this dream that lots of other people had. And that can be weird as well if we have this strange little hierarchy in our own mind of the kind of value that we're placing on some types of creativity and not others. And just I wonder, as we're having our cups of tea, or maybe you're drinking coffee, maybe even wine, depending on when you're listening to this, are you doing the same thing? Are you not allowing yourself to do one thing because you think there's something else that you should be doing? And that's, again, a should in inverted commas, an idea that maybe you've just absorbed culturally, maybe in your family. It's sort of not really deemed to be acceptable. Or maybe, hopefully, in a weird way, you can't relate to any of this because maybe you've already come to a place where you're really settled and comfortable in what you're doing, and that you're allowing yourself the time to practice your art in whatever form that is. The other thing I've found really interesting as I've changed various directions, I've lived in different places within Australia and around the world and had different relationships along the way there. And I've noticed that it makes such an incredible difference if your partner actually understands what you're doing or what you're trying to do, or even if they don't understand, they just have the sense that you're working on something that's really important to you, and that they're not stopping you from doing what you need to do, to feel that you're expressing yourself, you're being true to who you are. And maybe, hopefully, you have a really supportive partner if you do have one, or if you're single, maybe as I have been in the past, you just know that the next person that you're with has to understand that this is part of who you are, and that yes, there will be times that you just won't be available to them. And I've had to work hard in different ways over the years to make my partners understand that I can't always put a value on this. I can't, if I'm at the beginning of contemplating an idea, or if I've just started a project, I don't know necessarily what it is or where it's going to go, but I need to devote time for that. And I also don't need to give some rationale beyond this is important to me. So I've had to learn over the years as well about creating my own boundaries. And that can be tricky if you have a pretty vocal inner critic who's not always great at allowing you to do your own thing anyway. It can be even harder to then sort of affirm an idea in somebody else's mind that you're doing this thing that brings you joy or delight or flow, that it's immersive. It's hard to communicate that to someone else unless you've internalized that. So I can see now, looking back over many years of creative work, that things just become easier when we allow ourselves to be where we are. That absolutely our aspirations and ambitions serve us, because sometimes that's the fire that drives what we're doing. But so that we're not living in this tension state of dissatisfaction when we're actually sitting down to work, I think of it as holding the desire in mind, but then accepting the place that we're in and allowing myself to be really mindful with what I then produce. Just allowing myself to escape into the moment, to find the flow, to create what I need to, and to understand that it's all a process. I think sometimes we get so caught on needing to have a definitive output, a finished thing, a sculpted, crafted, finite something or other that we can point to and say, that's what I've been doing, that's why it's important. And if we haven't allowed ourselves the enjoyment of the process, we can sometimes rush it. When actually the deep ideas, the sense of allowing, whether you want to call it the muse or whatever your sense is of the place that your ideas come from that is not your conscious thought, sometimes they just need time to percolate. And when we try and push and rush, we may lose a sense of something that could reveal itself otherwise if we'd allowed the process to take a little bit longer. So I know there's a lot bound up in everything that I've just said. I'll let you in on a little secret. I do have green tea in front of me. Let me just take a sip. It's getting a bit cold now. But this recording itself is actually something I have never done before. I have not, contrary to Sarah's wise instruction, I haven't actually made any notes before talking to you. And I have just been looking out at the sky the whole time and trusting that there are things that I want to share, that there is insight somewhere here in all that I've just been saying that may be helpful to you. And not that we create necessarily in order to help other people, although there's usually a reader or a viewer or a participant of some sort, an audience to whatever, a wearer potentially. Maybe you're a knitting fan. Slight tangent. I'm thinking this winter I might get into knitting again. I haven't done that for about 20 years, but maybe it's time to start again. Anyway, sometimes when we just give ourselves the space and time and freedom to trust that there are things within us that need and deserve to come into the world, that they will do so in a way that others can pick up and run with, or it may give them a tiny reframe in their thinking or a new idea for a practice. But we can never know ourselves what others will take from our work. And I think that's, if we have some kind of philanthropic mindset as well, I think a lot of us are driven creatively. We really are wanting to make the world a better place whilst expressing ourselves. And because we can't know what others will take from what we make, that adds to the beautiful splendor and majesty of the process of creation, because sometimes it's about trusting and allowing, and maybe nothing comes from it, or we think nothing comes from it, but we've come further along the line because we've actually given ourselves permission to create. And that in itself is a victory. Some days it's more meaningful than others, but allowing ourselves to create is always a good thing. Thank you so much for joining me for this cup of tea. If you'd like to find out more about my work, and if you are an aspiring author, several articles on my website that I think you would really enjoy. Come along to hellosaramoss.com. That's no H on Sarah. So hello, SARAMOSS.com. And if I'd love to have you along in my small community, whereby I send out notes from the studio, from this very spot that I'm sitting in right now as I'm talking to you each month. If you are a non-fiction lover and an aspiring author, I send out notes about creativity and books you can't put down and writing tips to help you finish your own. May you go and create wonderful things later today, right now, tomorrow. I hope you can enjoy the space that you're in, whilst reaching for the stars, but just allowing yourself to be right now. Good luck, and thank you so much for being here. Take care.
A big thanks to Sara for recording this podcast and for allowing me to share it with all of you guys. If you would like to sign up for these weekly Tea Time podcasts, you can do so at CuriousPixie.com. And all of the pledges go towards supporting the podcast, helping pay for hosting fees so I can keep all of the backlog of episodes live, and recording gear and creative supplies and things like that. Before we go, I also wanted to give you just a little teaser from Ruth's episode, because Ruth went up in March and I haven't had a chance to share a little snippet from her yet. So this is what you get access to if you sign up to Patreon.
The other thing I want to say is just, I think it's important to give ourselves permission not to be the best from the beginning, because I don't know about you, but one of the reasons why I sometimes default back to my comfort zone is because that's where I feel like I operate best. And that's not bad. It's not bad to do the things that we're best at, but it's also not bad not to be the best.
Thanks so much for hanging in there with me. Again, if you want to sign up, you can do so at CuriousPixie.com. If you want to find the show notes from today's episode, they are at sarashots.com. And a big shout out to all of my current patrons for making this podcast possible. So that's it for me for now. I will be posting updates about the baby over on Instagram. So if you want to follow those, I am at Sara D. Shots, Sara with an H, and share your own curious, creative adventures with hashtag Kindle Curiosity. See you next time. I hope you enjoyed today's episode. You can find the show notes at KindleCuriosity.com. This podcast is completely powered by Patreon. You can pledge as little as $1 a month to keep this podcast advert-free, or you can pledge $5 for the bonus podcast, Tea Time. You can also support the podcast by leaving a rating and review. This really helps other people to find the podcast. If you want to connect with me, you can find me on Instagram at Sara D. Shots. Feel free to tag me or pop over and introduce yourself. I love to connect to other curious souls. And a big thanks to all of my patrons. I couldn't do this without y'all. That's it for today's episode. I'll see you next time.